Welcome back to my Ring of Red series. Assuming that this Ring of Red does not crash your computer forever, we'll see what we can do about this situation. So, what do I do with this enemy that has a very small amount of health left? We should negotiate with them. Something that kind of irritates me, not very much, but the setting very heavily implies that maybe finding a peaceful way to resolve things would be a whole lot less bad than what we're doing here. But it's not happening. I mean, forget the political situation, the gameplay just doesn't allow it. And the reason this bugs me is that when a game has a very strong message on how war is awful and we should work towards peace, it would help the message a lot if there was some allowance for that in gameplay. Now, Undertale is, of course, a very well-known example of this, but since just mentioning that game brings up huge arguments about toxic fan bases, I won't mention Undertale at all. Yeah. I see what I did there. So, let's just go back to this game. I'm mostly checking what I can follow up on and perhaps who should do what next. The usual tactics stuff. And while I'm doing that, there's something else that I've been thinking about and I'd like to monologue about a little bit, which is one of the ideas I've had for this channel is a perhaps short series of videos aimed at people who are not so familiar with video games, but something has come up in their lives where they like to learn a bit more of them. Like, for example, a new friend has an interest in it, or a relative wants them to join and they'd like to but don't know what they're doing. And it's an idea that strikes me as interesting, but there's just so much that I have no idea where to start. I mean, the idea of genre is useless because it assumes previous knowledge. Oh yeah, I'm taking a while to decide here because my recon is at half health and I obviously don't want them to lose the other half, but since they only have one anti-soldier squad, I feel like I should be okay. Anyway, in addition to the whole genre being not helpful in general, even if you try to work with it, examples within a genre are wildly different. For example, this game and Shining Force are both tactics games. I think it'd be hilarious if you tried to play one like you would play the other. But going back, if someone wants to start to understand games but doesn't have any understanding before, well, everyone has to learn about this sort of thing somehow. And there are certain examples that can be given for a sort of a hands-on approach. Like, there's a whole bunch of free web games and stuff, and not all of them are horrible. There's also the understandable idea that people would want to know something about what they're doing before they jump into it. And of course, this goes double for anything that they might spend money on. So I've tried to come up with different ways to measure these games, such as the pacing. Like, for example, anything with very strict timing or speed requirements is going to play differently from a turn-based game. And that sort of thing is reasonably easy for me to describe. Like, if you're in a one-on-one fighting game and something happens, you don't have much time to decide on what to do. Whereas, of course, in games like Tactics Ogre or, I don't know, this game a lot of the time, or 4X space games, or 4X in general, especially if you're playing against a computer, you have all the time in the world. And then, of course, there's how severely you get punished for making mistakes, how complicated the decisions are. And then, of course, there's lots of other things that are not directly gameplay related, but can mean a lot, like general atmosphere, how story heavy a game is. And I feel like topics like that would be good for separate videos. The idea is I'd come up with the most basic explanations of what games are for my initial video, and then kind of branch off to other topics, which would be their own videos that I would make available. But it's a really daunting thing to do. Especially because I feel like if I'm going to talk about how varied games are, that means I might come across some thorny and controversial things as a result. For example, I'm not going to pretend that religion doesn't matter for a lot of people, and oh, the four-legged stacking has begun. Well, it was going to happen sooner or later, but because Kinsado didn't take much damage earlier, this should be no problem for him. Anyway, I'm not gonna pretend that games where you kill God don't exist. Like, people are gonna find out about Shin Megami Tensei sooner or later. But at the same time, I don't want to shove that in people's face, which is, well, I think one of the reasons that branching out into multiple videos is helpful. But since I'm not actually conversing with these people, it's hard for me to know what exactly is or isn't appropriate and when I should explain certain things. There's also violence, but that simply saying, hey, there are some games which have a lot of violent stuff, and showing some, I don't know, lead-ups to something bad happening without showing the actual gory result should be good enough if I edit it right. But politics and religion, I have no idea. Well, I have a little bit of an idea, but the approach is going to take some skill and a lot of thought. And there's also the idea of, well, if someone wants to play this game with you and you have no idea how to play it, what do you do? And that, of course, also in that case I have to generalize because I don't know the friend or niece or nephew or sibling or whatever else, what they're like or what they want. So the more I sort of talk out loud about this idea, the more difficult it sounds. But I feel like a tutorial about video games in general is a skill that could help a lot of people if I do it right. It's just that that's a gigantic if. Not related to that. I love how on the tactical map all the anti-AFWs are kinda drawn as these huge metal bricks. I kinda get the impression overall that anti-AFWs are supposed to be something extra, like these are the mini-bosses of the game or something. Alright, this is one of the reasons why being able to fire reasonably well at medium range is great for John. Because when he needs to take the squads off of an anti-AFW like this, that extra space can make a huge difference. Because each extra step that they have to take is extra time for them to, say, load up a shell and stop to fire that, or take some damage to their squads and thus they want to move that around, which means not advancing towards me. Very nice. That having been said, being at the outer part of medium is probably not too great regardless. Every little bit helps, of course. Now, this tactic that they're using is very smart. Medics don't do much damage anyway, especially at anything past short. So just recharging the smoke shot to keep smoke on me for the entire battle is a very good tactic. Or at least it would be in normal circumstances, except that they're using an anti-AFW and that time moving their squads is time that they're not moving forward. So in the end it still works in my favor. So I'm kind of curious now, if, dear viewers, you've ever encountered a situation where you have to explain video games, or not even that, just something that's really nuanced and complicated to someone who knows basically nothing. I'd love to hear about it, because I personally have enjoyed doing things like that for people. Not as a career, of course. That's a lot of work and I'm lazy. But just as a general life sort of thing, I'd love to hear about that. Like how it was handled, what the result was, or just, I don't know, any story that you can come up with. I'd love to see it. Well, Ryoko, what are you gonna do? Looks like you got a tricky situation ahead of you. Now, most of the tiles I can move to are roads, but they're also at short range, and she's not great at shooting squads from there, so at the time of this decision, I felt that moving into mountains doesn't delay my turn by that much. It's also decent defensive terrain, so it might be better overall. The problem is it would move her further away from the other enemies, and she'd have trouble reaching them to remove squads later. But maybe Jun can do some of that. He hasn't taken too much damage yet. Also, I'm rather surprised that Jun was able to remove such a nasty combination of squads like that. I mean, they both have good armor, and cooperation is a really punishing skill, and smoke shot really limits the damage that you can do with your AFW shots. So I was pretty pleased about that. Although I guess it helped that their anti-AFW missed all of its shots. That was pretty nice. I think Ryoko is a little bit too far away. With the enemy terrain and the snow, her shots aren't looking amazing. The good news is that it seems to work both ways, though that might just be hyper morale taking effect. Oh. When that happens, well, I've already explained it, but there must have been something in the way. So I need to adjust my position, walk forward a little bit, which I can't do anymore now because my troops are pushed back, so I hope that little adjustment was enough. There's probably a tree in the way. I'm glad it was Ryoko. I'm sorry. If I was going to take a punishing shot like that, Ryoko with shield is really nice choice. So that definitely could have been worse. Uh-oh. So I'm not going to be able to remove that infantry, and they do have shrapnel. But the good news is that since this is a medium AFW, I can have maybe Emilio move in at short range to finish them off, and so the only thing that'll happen is they'll have a soldier load, or infantry loading their shells, which is not ideal. I'm not quite sure what took me so long to decide there. Well, you've seen this play out a few times before. You may have noticed there isn't even room in the interface for AFWs with more than say, 1,000 hit points. That's just another clue that if you expect all the numbers to constantly go up as you go on, well, this isn't Super Robot Wars, and it's not most tactics games either. But you knew that stuff already. Now, moving Ayana right next to that medium AFW seems like a bad idea, but I checked the turn order, and assuming that they're both able to finish off their targets, this anti-AFW is going to be finished off by Ayana, and the medium is going to be finished off by Emilio, and there will be no problems. By the way, I think it's amazing that I got a shooter unit with wire. That makes Ayana's job here a lot easier. Man, if I could find an infantry or recon unit with wire, I'd probably marry it. But they kept wire away from those anti-infantry, anti-personnel squad types for a really good reason. It just feels really weird to use this terminology wherein infantry is usually used as a general term for ground troops, but it's also a specific kind of squad in this game. Well, Weizsäcker has stuff to do. I mean, I probably could save myself a little bit of damage with Smoke Shot, but it's probably better to save it for just in case Weizsäcker is attacked in an unexpected way and he just needs to survive. Also, I'm not waiting for any special situation for this accurate fire, and the reason for this is waiting to see if I need it for a final shot or something is only really a concern if I might have a shortage of maximum attacks in the future. However, the number of enemies with this much armor is going to be pretty limited, at least in the maps I'm dealing with right now. I think we actually did aim too much in that case. Fortunately, you see, there's the problem again. My shooters are up to it. They just fired some rockets and, well, there you go. Unfortunately, unlike terrain or nighttime conditions, there is no skill that can counter the effects of snow. You just gotta deal with it. So there is a trick. That light AFW could attack Ayana at close range if I move Emilio. However, it is so heavily damaged that it's likely to retreat instead. And even if it did attack, I think there's a fair chance that Ayana could handle it. So we've got a pretty tough AFW ahead of us. Well, the good news is it's already taken a punch. That makes this a lot easier. And that shot pretty much sealed it. I can start walking forward right now. And wow, that damage though. Those two rifle grenades. I keep wanting to call them rocket-propelled grenades, but they're actually not. They're just propelled by the rifle bullets. And yeah, each one deals about as much damage as a direct shell hit. That is brutal. I say that a lot, but it's genuine. I promise. Well, I guess that's that, and also for this video. We'll see you next time.